Welcome, O listener, to another episode of Spam Humbug. This is episode 149 of the podcast, and this week we are taking a bit of a pause from readings of Through the Moongate, and instead we're featuring an interview with Mark Lemmert, also known as Nox Dragon. Mark is the lead developer of 6502 Workshop's recently released 8-bit CRPG, Nox Archaist. We've had him on the podcast before a couple of times, but he graciously agreed to come back on for another episode, another interview to talk about the game, which, if you've been following the news on the Ultima Codex, was released last weekend. Just a reminder, Spam Humbug is hosted on Anchor.fm, a newer and more social podcast hosting platform. You can find us at anchor.fm/SSSH podcast or at spamhumbug.com. And if you are listening to us via the Anchor app, please do consider throwing a like onto any episodes that you enjoy, or even towards the podcast itself. You can also leave us voice messages there, and we will find a way to incorporate those into our episodes. As always, this episode of the podcast is brought to you by our Patreon backers, patreon.com/ultimacodex, if you'd like to join their number. Thank you to everyone who supports the podcast and the Codex by that means. And as always, a hearty thank you to our co-producers, Seth, Golden Flame, Chris, Dominic, Violation, Helgrove, Gronk, Pascal, and Thorwan. All right, let's get on with the interview. So we are joined tonight by Nox Dragon. I forget, am I supposed to double pronounce the F?
Well, whenever I'm asked whether the F is silent or not, I usually say, well, sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. It's kind of mysterious like that. So, because Nox Fred is a wizard after all, so, kind of is able to distort things at his pleasure. So,
well, there you go.
But thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's good to have you back. We had talked some time ago now about Nox Archaist, and it just so happens that, we have you back on just in time to talk about Nox Archaist again, in light of it having been just released, which is like, wow.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. It's been 5 years in the making, and it's almost hard to believe that it's finally released. It's been so long. It's been in the future. It's been a future thing, and now it's actually released. It's like I stepped through a Moongate, and suddenly I'm now in the world where Nox Archaist exists, and is a game that people can and are playing, and that's just really exciting for me, and it seems for many others as well, and that's awesome.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm actually just looking back, trying to remember roughly what episode it would have been where we last talked about Nox, and I'm drawing a bit of a blank.
I think it was in June or July. We were talking about some of the audio, the special audio that we implemented with some help from Dr. Katz.
Right, yes, that there, episode 141. Yes, we were talking about, your 5-bit pulse width modulation and Dr. Katz's suggestion on how to add that to the project. And then, of course, we got to hear the title screen and the title sound, and which is awesome.
That's right. We did that live right on the podcast. Held the microphone up to my Apple II, and we got to listen to it talk.
Yeah, 2 or 3 attempts later, I think we got that just right, so that's good.
Yes. Third time's the charm.
Right.
Getting the microphone situated and having long enough cable. I remember that was tripping me up a little bit with that. It's an impromptu, but yes, lots of fun.
Yeah, so, obviously, 6 months isn't like an incredibly long window of time, but I imagine there have been some changes, or sort of just stuff that's like, you've gone back and like in those last 6 months kind of bringing it to conclusion. There's probably a few things that either got changed or ended up being a little different in the end than you had initially planned. But like what's been the big stuff over the last 6 months that's really kind of characterized getting Nox Archaist to this point?
Sure. Well, the big thing in the last 6 months is we went through really the bulk of the testing of the project. Certainly there was testing that was going on throughout kind of the 5-year period, but this last 6 months was where we opened it up to a public, I wouldn't say totally public, but outside of the development team tester group of a couple dozen people. Cool. We set them up on Discord, had some tester beta channels or some tester Discord channels, and they had at it, playing the game both on their modern Macs and Windows PCs, and also on the original Apple II hardware. And they put the game through its paces, and that led to lots of adjustments and some moments where I was like, "Ooh, boy, I shouldn't have done that." But I'm pleased to report that this game of chess that I've been playing against the Apple II computer for the last 5 years, I did not get checkmated in the end. I did not.
Nice.
It's all about resources. We're talking about 128K of RAM and a 1 megahertz processor, and the risk of getting oneself into a situation that you can't, from a coding point of view, get out of is a constant risk. And,
I'm sure.
There were a couple of close shaves at the end. I ended up using up the last block of disk space, patching up one of those situations, but it just made it, So,
oh man,
so that was the focus, and the nice thing about that is being through that period, aside from obviously the game being released, is it was exciting for me going through that to be able to actually then see, is the game holding up to being what I always intended it to be in terms of like the core design goals. And certainly there were some adjustments that had to be made here and there, but now I actually know and can share how it's actually turned out. Not what I think the game is going to be, like we've talked about before, but right, what it actually is. And I'm very pleased to say that it has worked out, that Nox Archaist is truly an open world game with linear elements within a deep storyline, integrated with combat scenarios to keep the gameplay fresh and exciting. And that means that the world is actually, while it's going to be great and open, go explore, it's huge, you'll love that, it's also going to react to what you do as the player to an extent that it is just not something that Apple II games did. And in sometimes in fairly dramatic fashion, as far as how the game will adapt and react, changes to the world and so forth, and all that being tied into the story, and then I mentioned combat scenarios. It has worked out that it's not just a grind. Yes, there's lots of combat, there's lots of story, and the two intertwine where, maybe not maybe, I can say definitively now, there are boss battles in the game, some of them, where in order to get through that battle, it's going to require basically having paid attention to the story and thought about the story, thought about the puzzles, to be able to actually know how to beat a particular boss. It might mean that you just need to know something, might mean that you need to find something or some things, it kind of becomes a little bit of a puzzle into and of itself, how to succeed against that particular enemy, as opposed to just simply grind, brute force your way through, the boss battle and so on. And I'm really excited about that because I both like story and I like combat. I like both.
Well, that's awesome. And, I got to ask, because it's something that you said, and like, when you talk about the world being dynamic, when you talk about the world reacting to the player, I mean, that's awesome, because you're right. It's not something that's really been done a lot, really at all, maybe in most Apple II games that either of us could probably think of. And you can probably think of a lot more than I can. But equally, like, just from my own dabbling with game engines or with modding, and from, my understanding that I've sort of built up over the years, talking with people who do work in the gaming industry and other areas of the gaming industry, ones that are a little less constrained by, shall we say, 128K of memory and 1 megahertz of processor power. My understanding is that kind of dynamism, like you pay a heavy toll in memory. You pay a heavy toll in terms of just the amount of variables that the game has to track in order to know, oh, okay, these things have happened, therefore I need to have the world react in this way. And so I'm kind of curious, and I just want to pull at that thread a little bit, if you don't mind. Like,
sure.
How did you manage to implement the level of dynamism you're talking about when you have a profound scarcity of memory to track the necessary information with?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, and it is to your point, something that developers on modern systems find challenging, and how many modern games have we played where we're going through various quests, this and that, and gee, there's a bug, and some quest just totally falls down because you talk to somebody in the quest chain before the game expected you to do so. And suddenly, it doesn't work.
Or that, yes.
So yeah, it's like you said, challenging for developers on modern platforms as well. And on the retro platform, it was a multifaceted challenge, as you can imagine. Both on the resource side, in addition to the complexity of the logic, and it really, I'll draw back on my analogy before, was really just, it was a game of chess against the computer. Not in a literal sense, because you, of course, can play chess against the Apple II, but in the sense of I had to build the game, not just, one piece at a time, what kind of goes without saying, but different pieces at a time, because I never knew for sure how exactly how much memory was each system going to take. The combat system, the inventory system, the NPC conversation system, no matter how good I might be or not be at estimating, there with the as limited as the resources are, I could never be sure enough. So what I would end up doing is I do some work on the combat system, then I do some work on the inventory system, then some work on maybe ancillary systems for pop up text windows for clues when you're in dungeons, because I know I'm going to need those. Better get those out of the way, see how much memory they take, and then look again. How much do I have left? And then kind of do the next thing. And that would inform decisions in each particular subsystem of the game of, okay, well, how many features can I really add here? The closer, each module gets to done, the more I can kind of get a sense for how much wiggle room I have and make those key decisions on, what features are going to make it in and what ones are not. And as it relates to the dynamic nature of the open world and the linear elements, and which in some levels, in some ways, kind of distills into a complex interweaving of state flags and things to track different events, and then support for those in each of the subsystems. That basically that challenge essentially becomes an extrapolation of that base resource juggling issue that I was doing. And so what I found myself doing is I actually left some of that to the end, some of the key decisions relating to exactly how dynamic was Nox Archaist going to be. At first, I just focused on other stuff, kind of left it to the end. Then I got to a point where it's like, well, okay, I'm going to start laying down some rail tracks here in the logic for if in the really towards the end of the game it looks like there's resources to really implement it. I've at least got some of the logical structures built in the earlier code that would be just horribly impractical to go back and integrate in after the fact. I started to lay some of that down, and then I got to probably last winter, really, where it was closing in on kind of the last stage of development, and got to a point of making the final decision on some of these linear dynamic elements, and kind of eyed it up. So, well, yep, looks like the the memory is there, and I've kind of got this some of this logic layered into these subsystems, and then testing was a huge side of it. In order to, I was really determined to the degree that I possibly could, as I don't want to release a game with these dynamic elements where it's got some of these classic problems where, depending on what order you do things in, it surprises the game code and weird stuff happens. And so I really tried as best as I could before even releasing it to any testers to just think through what were all the different possible paths that could drive these linear elements, and run through them myself. And that shook loose a lot of bugs. And ultimately, as much as that did, the testers found more. But I feel pretty good that with a couple dozen testers over the course of quite a few months since July, that they hammered on it and to the point where the bug reports just kind of trailed off. It was like I was like drinking from the fire hose for several months, and they were logging them faster than I could solve them. And some of them definitely were related to some of these linear elements and quests and goofy stuff happening. But they were it was a great team to be collaborating with, and we worked out those issues. And I deployed two groups actually, to like a testing group 1 and testing group 2. Because when testing group 1 came in, they were still finding, stuff that I didn't catch even when I played through the game a couple of times in these different, paths and so forth. And, invariably the first testing group, they helped me hammer out a bunch of stuff, and they eventually get to the point where they're, winning the game. And it's like, okay, great. In theory, everything works except, okay, but everybody involved has now seen the game, into its late stages and not the end. But I had anticipated that and had recruited a second testing group that was standing by, and basically ready to go when I said the word. And the call went out for the second group of heroes, and they came in with a fresh set of eyes to then look at the game as it iterated through my testing, the dev team's testing, the external, group 1 testing, and then the fresh set of eyes came in to then put it, really evaluate, okay, well, did all that work? Or are there more bugs that now aren't being seen because everybody's, already familiar with it? And there were a few things that group 2 caught, but I'm pretty confident about it because there wasn't a lot. When group 2 came in, it was just a little bit here, a little bit there, some wonderful polishing that happened as a result of that. But it wasn't a barrage that left me wondering, okay, do we need a group 3, kind of a thing. So, that's pretty much the process of how that came to be, to bring to life an open world with dynamic properties to it and some linear embedded story elements on an 8-bit computer.
On an 8-bit computer, because, why not?
Just why not?
That's, yeah.
You got to push the frontier forward. That's half the fun.
Well, that is how you build it initially, right? Was, exploring where 8-bit gaming would have gone if the 16-bit revolution hadn't necessarily occurred, right?
Exactly. That is exactly it. Ultima 5 is, was the last Ultima on the Apple II, and fantastic game. Probably my favorite Ultima of all time. And then over to the PC, the IBM PC, I think probably 386 era, if I recall, for Ultima 6. And it begged the question, obviously the industry, was forced to move on from an economic perspective, the economics surrounding the technology, but how much of the Apple II machine was left that was untapped that might have been able to be exploited if development had continued, and that's what I wanted to find out. And I did not know when I started the project that how much was there or not, and what I found is as I probably said before, that there was more than probably most people would guess, in just seeing where Ultima 5 was at, and then the huge jump to Ultima 6, and I think where Nox Archaist dials in is closer to Ultima 5 gameplay technology than Ultima 6, but it's probably arguably as big of a jump as there was between Ultima 4 and 5. Maybe not quite that, but close. And that was a lot more than I expected. And so in the course of doing that, we were in that exploration able to bring in some modern sensibilities to the gameplay, which was something that I know our testers, really liked in terms of the approachability of the game. Things like menu-driven inventory and character management system, fully menu-driven, full tactical combat, but also quick combat option for dispatching low-level mobs to minimize the grinding. All of us who played the early Ultimas probably remember, getting coming out of the dungeon, and you want to head to town to sell your loot, and you're like level 8, and you get attacked by orcs, and you've got to sit there and go through the whole tactical battle, and it's like, really, after the 20th time. Well, with quick combat and Nox Archaist, no problem. That orc battle like that is dispatched in a matter of a couple of seconds, and you get the satisfaction of it happening with the quick combat display showing the number of the mobs on the screen, and you get to see them disappear one by one, and you see your player stat or your character stats and all that. So
nice.
But big time saver. Then you can spend the time on the tactical battles that matter, where the outcome is not so certain. We've also got a tab driven target selector in combat, just to get on this modern sensibilities theme, where when you're attacking in combat, like a ranged weapon, especially like a bow, and you got maybe a half dozen mobs out there on the screen, after you press that A key to attack, then you're just pressing tab to flip between the different targets. You're not having to be limited to just attacking north, south, east, or west, or even moving a target selector around manually. It's just really fast. You just tab between them, and that really speeds things up. We've even got a brief in-game tutorial. It's not extensive by modern standards by any means, but when you start out the game, you're in an area that's really designed for you, the player, to kind of get the hang of the mechanics, and there are pop-up windows that show up on screen with tutorial tips for you press O to open the door, and press A to attack the rats that are next to you in the hold of the ship, or what have you, just for the somebody that wants to just dive into the action. That's a little bit of a refresher for anybody that wants to just take that approach to it. And then I think one of my most favorite, if you could call this a modern sensibility, I guess it is in a way and it is not in other ways. But Lord British is an NPC in the game, as you know.
Yeah.
And what exactly the implementation of that was going to be was kind of unknown for a while. Kind of had the broad strokes figured out, but there was one particular feature that was one of those that I really wanted to do, but I saved it or delayed it until the very end because I wasn't sure from a resource standpoint, what how it was going to work out.
Right, as you mentioned.
As I mentioned, this is one of those things. And so what has worked out is that in addition to playing a key role in the story, Lord British will also, if you ask, give you the player hints on each stage of the mainline quest. And
cool.
They're optional. You don't have to ask if you want to kind of just go Iron Man, see if you can beat the game without it. That's a legitimate way to play. On the other hand, if Nox is a challenging game, and Lord British is there to give you that, advice and helping hand if you want. And that is one of the reasons that waited to the end actually, ties into one more such thing. I guess, again, modern sensibilities is there's a quest log. I don't think that's ever happened in an Apple II game. There's a quest log, and what my memories of playing the early Ultimas is, it's like when I would go back and play them over the decades, I could sense the presence of quests. It's kind of like before quests were formally invented, but you can
they're not strongly indicated,
right?
Yeah.
You talk to an NPC and they would say, well, maybe go talk to the blacksmith in Minot about, the magic hammer. And okay, well, that's like a quest, except you don't really know that there's nothing about it that announces that it's a quest. You can choose to write it down in your notes or not, to remember it or not. But yeah, so I thought about that, and it's like, well, yeah, the fundamental building blocks of quests were there in Apple II games, such as Ultima. It just wasn't formalized. And so what it worked out to be able to do was essentially attach state flags and a logical structure around it to those, events in the game, those tasks in the game, and then roll up those state flags into a display in the form of a quest log that will, just like a modern game would, in concept, kind of keep track of what are the different, things that you need to do that you've been tasked with by various NPCs. It's, of course, there's a certain, roughness to it, being a 8-bit game in all. It's not, a full-blown quest journal where it's going to keep track of every clue that you find on the quest, so, break out that spiral notebook. That's still probably a good idea. But nonetheless, it still is a helpful guidepost along the way. And that really dovetailed into the function of Lord British giving hints, because, as I said, it's all coming together at the end, because what the way that works with Lord British giving hints is I basically wrote some code in the conversation module that taps in to the quest logs data structure. And so Lord British is basically peeking into your quest log from the data point of view. And okay, what mainline quest flags are flipped? Where are you in the mainline? And then once he keys in on that, runs that through a lookup table to look up, well, what's the text I'm supposed to say when you're at that particular when that particular quest flag is active in the mainline. So it's like when one domino fell, the next one fell, so to speak, as far as that coming together at the end. And I was really, really happy to see how that came together, both in terms of the gameplay and the approachability of it, as well as I just thought that was fundamentally a fun, friendly, reminiscent sort of a thing for Lord British to do. That's what I feel like as the avatar, from the Ultima games. And here I find Lord British in this other world. That's how I would just imagine that he would be. He would give you advice and, not do the quest for you, because of course, his influence in that other realm is limited, but, he'd give you advice and point you in the right direction, I would think.
I think that's a darn sight more helpful than he's been in any of the other games that he's been in. So, but that's an interesting discussion, right? Because that's an interesting, tangent you just took us through there, because there's a tendency, especially in, the communities that really still strongly value, let's say, 8-bit games, or those older school games. There's sort of this tendency to kind of disdain a lot of the systems that have been developed over the many, many years between the Apple II era, the 8-bit era, and now, right? Things like the Quest Journal and whatever else. But at the same time, so it's interesting to hear you talk about that because, I mean, I'm kind of ambivalent about a lot of those things, if they're there, great. If they're not, great. I can write my own Quest notes, but it is handy to have them there in a menu that I can call up. I can play with them. I can play without them. It's not a big deal to me, but it's cool that, again, with this philosophy of exploring, well, where could we have gone with 8-bit gaming? What was still within reach on an 8-bit platform? It's interesting that, you've targeted some of these modern contrivances, things like the quick combat or the tab targeting or a Quest Journal that, they are, I mean, I guess, in my professional career, I'd probably head that all under quality of life. That would be in the quality of life column. Because, in a way, I mean, I don't see that any of those things would detract from the experience of a game, especially as you say, for a level 8 character who, probably wants to spend some time reasoning out each move in a battle against some elder dragon or what have you.
Exactly.
That is appropriate to their experience level. But if it's just a bunch of, level 1 orcs or kobolds or whatever that, might land a hit or two as they are quickly wiped out of existence, do I really need to spend this 15 minutes? Probably not.
And if you want to, you still can. It's all at the player's option. Yeah.
Which is good too, right? That you have that optionality built in there. It's just oh, okay, this one we can quick combat. That's fine. But if I want to spend some time with the orcs, I can. That's good. And it's also kind of, just an interesting, it's interesting to me that, an 8-bit game could technically, now does officially, support these same features that, nowadays, wouldn't have seemed new or novel in, say, Skyrim, right? These have been quality of life improvements to games for quite some time now. But so it's interesting that, a lot of those same things could and now have successfully been brought to 8-bit gaming. It's neat. And again, it's sort of a continuation of that exploration of where 8-bit gaming could potentially have gone, now has gone.
What was once old has become new again.
Yes, exactly. So I know we've obviously talked about this on previous episodes, but just in case anybody's listening for the first time, and they're wondering what this Nox Archaist business is all about, and I don't know if we want to launch into a full rehash of the game, but we should probably at least ask the question, and you've mentioned this already when you were talking about your beta testers, but just so we can, formally ask it and get the official answer. Obviously, it's an 8-bit RPG, but if someone wants to pick it up and play it, what are their options?
As far as how to get a hold of the game?
Exactly.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So Nox Archaist is available as a digital download or in a collector's box set with a cloth map, 125-page manual filled with lore, and a full-color painting by Dennis Loubet. And the collector's box also has other feelies, such as a high-quality metal coin of the realm, a wax-sealed writ from the Queen, and much more. And to get a hold of excuse me, to get a hold of either the digital download or the collector's box set, that can be ordered at noxarchaist.com. And in addition to the game itself, we have a whole bunch of merch available featuring the game art like t-shirts, coffee mugs, and even posters of the cloth map and posters of Dennis Loubet's Demon Lord painting from the manual cover. It's all there on our Nox Archaist store.
Cool. So people can obviously go to the Nox Archaist store. We'll make sure there's a link in the show notes. So you talk about digital downloads, right? So that's available then. They can pick it up and just play it on. You don't need an Apple II or some kind of 8-bit system to run this thing is basically where we're going with that, right?
Yes. The game is playable on, of course, original Apple II hardware, but also on modern Windows and Mac OS computers. And actually, I should mention this because this was another thing that I wasn't sure about until very late in the process, and not since we last talked, is you actually don't even need to deal with an Apple II emulator if you want to play it on Windows or Mac OS, because we have bundled with the game something we call the Nox app. It is basically it's a Mac and a Windows application that you click on, and it runs the game. End of story. And and I'll say this just for authentic purposes, there is an Apple II emulator under the hood, so it is genuine 6502 code that is running on your modern computer. It's just we put a wrapper around the emulator, or actually, to give full credit, it was not the internal Nox team. It was actually Paleotronic, who is the developer of the Micro M8 Apple II emulator. We partnered with them, and they put a wrapper around their Micro M8 emulator and branded with some Nox Arden things, and turned it over to us as the Nox app. And we plug in our 6502 code, and away you go. And so it's the authentic, Apple II game experience in an emulator, but without having to worry about downloading an emulator or how the emulator works. We've abstracted all of that, and it's just a matter of, you've got an app, you click on it, and you're playing the game.
That is super handy. I mean, and again, guys like you and me, it's fine if we got to install an emulator. I'm a little rusty on what my current gen Apple IIs are. Micro M8 is one. Basilisk was for Mac. Whatever. The point is, guys like you and me, yeah, sure, we can stand up and install an emulator, but it's not necessarily everybody's cup of tea. And getting some of them working there's a few more hoops to jump through than maybe a lot of users want to, just to pick up and play a game. So that's really awesome that, it's just a one-click solution.
Absolutely, and it's something that understandably some people might not want to deal with. They just they want to play the game, not learn how to do some new thing. And like you said, some are easier than others. And I feel really good just as far as making the game more accessible, more approachable. We really wanted to be able to do this for that reason, and I'm really glad that it worked out.
Definitely.
Oh, actually, one last footnote on that for any hardcore users Apple II users that may be listening. On the digital download, the actual disk image for the game that you would use on an Apple II emulator is there. So if you get the digital download, you can play on whatever Apple II emulator you want. You don't have to use the Nox app. It's there, but so is the raw disk image that you can plug into whatever emulator you want. And the collector's box set as well has a USB drive that's actually shaped like a little 5 1/4-inch diskette, a miniature one.
Awesome.
USB drive. And that USB drive has the same contents as the digital download does.
Awesome. So, and I mean, again, it's been a long time since I've been in front of an Apple II, but there was this one time that I was driving through Trinidad where there were like a whole bunch of like dead Apple and Mac computers just piled up on the side of the road. Weirdest thing I ever saw. I would have taken one, but there's no way to get it on the plane. Anyways, tangent.
Sure.
So just for curiosity's sake, because, obviously I'm not going to download this to my Apple II. Not that I have one, but hypothetically, if I had an Apple II, this isn't something that I would just, download to my Apple II. That's not how that's going to work. So, and I imagine for people who have and maintain Apple IIs, it's no biggie for them to figure out how to take a disk image and get it into onto a disk that will run on the Apple II. But I'm assuming there's, like if they want to buy the original Apple II version, you're not going to just email them. Sorry, you can't email. You're not going to actually mail them. Gosh, I'm so terribly modernist. It's terrible. You're not actually going to send them 5 1/4-inch discs, are you?
We did
buy the Apple II version.
We did have a box set with the Kickstarter campaign that we did a year and a half ago that included actual 5 1/4-inch discs, and those are basically right now just beginning to be shipped out. The digital download, we posted that first, and we're taking care of the physical rewards here on the Kickstarter. And one of those reward tiers did have physical 5 1/4 inch discs. And so in that case, yes, those people literally will be mailed 5 1/4 inch diskettes that they've been popping their floppy drives. For the collector's editions, that is what we currently have offered. It doesn't have the 5 1/4 inch disc. What it has is the USB drive, and that has the disk images on it, and both for what I would refer to as a hard drive disk image and floppy disk images. And so what happens from there for somebody that has an Apple II computer is many folks that have Apple II computers or are into Apple II computers these days have hard drive cards in those computers. And the sort of modern made hard drive cards have a USB port on them. So it's kind of quote unquote hard drive. So basically what you do is if you're an Apple II user that has a hard drive card like a CFFA or a boot eye, or on some systems even a floppy EMU will work. You literally just take the USB drive that you get from us, and you can plug that right into your hard drive card on your Apple II computer, and you can fire up the game, and you're good to go, or copy it onto a different USB drive if you want. And if you're a Apple II user, you have Apple II computer, and you want to play it on floppy, the floppy disk images are on the USB stick or in the digital download. You would just have to transfer them to floppy disk yourself, which is not a process for the faint of heart.
Right.
It's not the most difficult thing in the world, but it's also, if it's not something that you've done before, there are a fair number of things that can go wrong, just because we're dealing with 40-year-old technology. There's a modern computer on one end that's hosting the server side, that has that disk image that is involved, but at the other end of a long cable connected to your Apple II is the 40-year-old technology. So there's some things that can go wrong there.
For sure.
But I just mentioned it, that it is an option, and for people that's important to them, they probably know how to do it. Is most likely the case.
I was going to say, I mean, if this is something, if you have the genuine enthusiast who's like, no, I got to play this OG off the floppy on a Apple II, they're probably already set up to do that. So not a big deal. Hi, Joe Garrity. Well, that's awesome. So Nox has been and there's been a handful of other projects that I've been following as well, some of which I've covered on the Codex, most of which I hope I've covered on the Codex, my goodness. Although I think Nox is probably I think the first one that's really hit its release. So that you say you've been working on it for, I got to ask,
Sure.
You've been working on this for 5 years. What's your dev system, and what's your backup system?
Sure. So I have actually kind of two computers involved. Strictly speaking, I'm doing development on a Windows 10 computer, and that's like where the cross assembler sits that translates. I write the 6502 assembly code that I write. I do it in Notepad++, and that gets fed into a cross assembler that translates that 6502 assembly code into a binary file that the Apple II understands. And it's that binary file that then is what gets transferred to floppy disk, or gets put on a USB drive and plugged into one of these modern hard drive cards in an Apple II that understands how to interface with USB, and therefore get at said binary file that the Apple II understands. So
Awesome.
I'm driving it all off of a Windows 10 computer. I'm not sitting down at an actual Apple II and writing in the code. I have done that, and I have done it. I did it a lot in the 80s. I mean, because that's what you did, right? But
as you do, yeah.
as you do. But in modern time, I have done it in modern times, like at the early end of the project. And I did it enough to be very convinced that if there's a better way to do this, I'm going to do it. I'm going to find it and do a better way. And then I researched cross assemblers and got up to speed on what's the modern way to do this as far as like writing assembly language code on old computers. Because it just really speeds it up. You have a mouse and you can copy and paste the code. I mean, you still have to know that Apple II inside and out, or whatever retro computer you're working with inside and out, because in the end, it's got to run on that machine.
Yes, definitely.
But you don't get bogged down in the tediousness of your label names can only be a very short length because that's taking up precious memory in the computer that you want for your actual code, or
right.
user interface limitations like copy and paste. So yeah, that's the short answer. There is the Windows 10 machine is really driving it. And then I said there were multiple machines involved. This is the kind of maybe the odd thing. I think this might just be me, but I actually RDP into the Windows 10 computer from a MacBook, and
as you do.
that's just how I do it. And the reasons for that are a long and probably not terribly interesting story, other than just to say that I really like how the windows flip around with like the RDP window juxtaposed against the native Mac windows. I get sort of a flexibility in window management that I don't feel like I get if I'm actually sitting down at the Windows 10 machine. So that's actually what kept me doing it in that way long after whatever the original reason was disappeared.
I dig it. Workspace is important, right?
Yeah,
like it's
do what's efficient.
Yeah, no, definitely. I do all my coding on Windows 10, but literally, especially on my work PC, right? If I'm hammering out code for one of the apps I maintain at work, I've got my two monitors, and everything has its assigned monitor in my brain, right? Mm-hmm. There's no reason why that app has to be on that there's no functional reason integral to the good operation of the computer why that app has to be on that monitor. But in my brain, I need it over there.
Pointer to it.
Yeah, I need it over there.
That becomes the reason.
And I need, this other app over here and the code right here. And so I get that, like if that's your sweet spot, for being in your development groove. I mean, all power, right? All power. So that's cool.
Yep.
So
got to keep it efficient. What you're used to.
What a long road it's been. 5 years. And of course, when you started this 5 years ago, you didn't, you hoped to hit release date. I remember there were 2 Kickstarter campaigns, right? There was one, but then it didn't really quite catch on. So then you did the second one. And of course there was did you even imagine starting this 5 years ago that Lord British was going to be one of your NPCs?
No. The imagination that I had on where the project was going to go 5 years ago is really nothing compared to where it ended up. I think because this is really an extension of the dabbling I did as a kid in the 80s. Playing games, wanting to write games, learning programming. While I was trying to write games, sort of thing, and got to a point where. I kind of had a map tile engine, working at one point, but nothing anywhere close to, okay, here's a finished, tile RPG game. And so when I got into this, I was kind of setting my sights on okay, so I have my old engine design in my head from, all these years later. So now that I have a much stronger computer science background, and the access to any book on the Apple II ever written through the internet, yep. the luxury of availability of information back in the 80s was something, you don't just, wake up one day and say, I want to learn, assembly language. for the Apple II. How do I do that? And just pull a book off the shelf. That you had to be lucky. You had to be lucky and have access to the right books. And if you're even luckier, have access to some people who actually knew it. I had none of those things. But anyway, so when I set to take another crack at it in modern times, my goal was something like on the gameplay technology level of Ultima 3. And, that I thought was a stretch goal, at the time, considering I'd never finished a game, when I last, tried this in the 80s. And I thought, okay, well, that's small enough that, and I was close enough with the map tile engine that I had gotten going in the 80s that, I kind of thought that was attainable, and then something happened. It just, things just went well, as hard as they were, but as determined as I was. And, I was able to get, see the progress happening. And there was a point where we've talked about the whole frontier thing. And this is like, explore what might have happened if things had pushed beyond. That actually came probably 6 months into the project, because the first 6 months was, okay, I'm going to make something with Ultima 3 like gameplay tech. And then where the real mission of Nox Archaist was born was really about 6 months in. It was when I got the map tile engine built in assembly language, and it was working really well. And I was starting to find that to conceive of like, okay, well, it would have been really cool if another Ultima on the Apple II had, done X, Y, or Z, like had 4 tile mobs, so you go and fight a giant and it's actually this 4 tile, huge thing. And then, be able to like go into my code and my, tile graphics engine, and where I already had, single tile mobs running around, be able to go in there and look and say like, well, okay, well, what's stopping me? Surely there was a reason that Ultima didn't have that, because, well, they would have if they could have, right? There must have been some technical obstacle, or was there? Or was it just that things moved on to the IBM PC, and, every Ultima was a major innovation on the one that came before that? And you pick the low hanging fruit. So this was the first thing. And so I sat there puzzling over it. It's like, it sure looks like this is possible. I don't see anything preventing it. So I went in and implemented 4 tile mobs and was like, wow, it actually works. Now, if I could do that, I wonder what else is it possible to do that wasn't done before, because it just hadn't come up yet, because there were easier things to do before it. And that's when, between myself and only one dev team partner then at that time that I was working on this with, started to really think like, well, hey, wait a minute, maybe we're setting the bar too low here. Maybe standing on the shoulders of giants, we could really explore here what might have come after, because it sure seems like there is room for something to have come after. And that's when the real mission of Nox Archaist really crystallized, as this isn't just, we're going to write an Apple II game and, it's going to be fun and, kind of mid-80s tech, whatever. It suddenly became clear that we were on a historical mission here. It was within the graphs to be able to really see what might have been able to come after, and then 4.5 years of later of actually doing it. Never imagined that it would take that long. I mean, that's got to be a recipe for scope creep if there ever was one? A nice, vaguely defined project. We're going to see what might have happened if. But that's okay.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm glad it happened, and even though it meant a 5-year project instead of perhaps a 1 or 2 year one.
Well, and I was going to ask you, like, the follow-on question I was going to ask you was, like, what had been, like, sort of the biggest change between 5 years ago and now, but I think you already really, really spoke to that. But I mean, what a journey, hey? Like, you start this thing as a vaguely defined passion project 5 years ago, and all of a sudden you're trading ideas with Dr. Cat. You have Richard Garriott asking to be an NPC in your game. You just, like, I'm pretty sure none of, that's got to be just a complete mess with your mind kind of thing, to have grown up playing a lot of the games that people like, Dr. Cat and Richard Garriott created, and now all of a sudden to basically be an equal with them, someone that they're bouncing ideas off of or swapping notes with.
Well, it's been an absolutely amazing experience, and you're absolutely right. I mean, it's the sort of thing where I would never have imagined. And, having grown up in the 80s playing Ultima and, just being absolutely amazed at what Richard Garriott had done and was doing with that. Yeah, I mean, it's in many ways a childhood dream, come true, to be, have the opportunity to interact with Richard Garriott and Dr. Cat and, other folks like them, the people that I looked up to and admired as a kid and, throughout life, really in terms of what they had achieved. And I always thought that I had missed the window, personally. I had the, in my mind, it was like, I want to program computer games for a living. That was kind of what I was thinking as I was playing, games like Ultima and Bard's Tale and, trying to program. But eventually I veered off in professionally in a different direction because it was just apparent to me that, the tech, as quickly as I was learning about stuff, things were, advancing so much faster. And sure, I suppose I probably could have, pursued some kind of career in that direction, but it wouldn't have been, the groundbreaking, kind of stuff that people like Richard and Dr. Cat were doing. And so there were other, interests that I then pursued. And pretty much for decades of my life had just shut this away, thinking like, that would have been cool, but I missed the window. If I had been 10 years older, I would have been, more in the zone. And it just never occurred to me until, 5 years ago that there even really was anybody who still was interested in playing an Apple II game. It really, I wasn't aware of there really being a retro community to speak of, or Apple II community specifically. I'd never gone out looking,
Right. Yeah.
It was just one day, 1 year, I moved, and the new place I moved to, I had a space where I thought, well, gee, this would make for a nice, computer room setup. I mean, I'm going to buy an Apple II off of eBay and play some Ultima and Castle Wolfenstein, just like the old days. Call up my friend that I used to play with, back then, and that's kind of where it started. It's just kind of, just because it would be fun to do that again. And ultimately that led to, I eventually, as I'm Googling stuff, I find that, wow, there's actually other people, still doing stuff with 8-bit games. And wow, this is really interesting. And so, so then eventually, one thing leads to another, and the old, passion for creating one, comes back. But yeah, I'm kind of circling around back to, what you were talking about before. There's just so many aspects of this that it's just like a childhood dream, come true that I always thought that I was too late for, that I was born too late for, 10 years too late for, having missed the window. And then to find that yet actually there was this whole other window that turned out to exist or open up, that I was actually exactly in the right place at the right time with the right skills for. Because that window is now. 10 years from now, 5 years, 5 years, 10 years, some number of time, into the future, this resurgence of 8-bit games, whatever it is that's happening now that's really very interesting, and not just Nox Archaist, as you point out,
Yeah.
This will have evolved and developed, and we don't know where it's going. But eventually, this window will close as well, and I feel really lucky and honored to have been able to be participate in it, and for the Apple II community at least be a leader in doing so, and it's really just very exciting for me to have seen this all come into fruition.
That is just awesome. All right. Well, when I do interviews, sort of the last question I ask before I wrap up is just, I mean, we've talked about a lot, but is there anything that we haven't yet covered that, you just are burning to make sure gets included? Anything else you want to make sure gets mentioned before we wrap up?
Yes, I'd like to express my thanks to the backers of Nox Archaist and my 6502 workshop development teammates, both of which were instrumental in making Nox Archaist the game that it is. And also, just to recap, if you're interested in playing Nox Archaist, you can find the digital download and collector's box set on our website, noxarchaist.com. And for Spaceballs fans out there, we've got merchandising. At noxarchaist.com, you can find Nox Archaist the t-shirt, Nox Archaist the coffee mug, Nox Archaist the Dennis Lubbe art poster, and who knows, maybe someday even Nox Archaist the flamethrower.
Definitely do check it out. I mean, it's been something that I've been following on the Ultima Codex for a while. It looks great. If you love the old 8-bit era games, Ultima 4, Ultima 5, many other classics of that era, definitely worth checking out. Thank you so much for taking the time. Like, this is awesome.
Absolutely, you're welcome, and thanks for having me back on the show. I've enjoyed our chats over the years as all this is played out, and I really appreciate that.
Awesome, and I hope that the game. I mean, obviously, it's already had a bit of a following, and I hope that now that it's out, there's a good size audience for it. I mean, on the one hand, like obviously, it's a niche game, right? The Apple II community is what it is. But I hope that, a lot of them pick it up, play it through, and I hope you get a lot of good feedback for it too. Because there's a lot of love and care and attention that has gone into its creation. And I hope that a lot of other people are able to enjoy it as much as, you very obviously have enjoyed bringing it to this completion.
Well, thank you. I certainly hope so as well. I think so. And thanks again.
If you want to join the Ultima Dragons, you can do so at udic.org, where you can choose your very own dragon name. You can also find the Ultima Dragons on Facebook. We have a Facebook group there. And you can follow at Ultima Dragons on Twitter, or join them on Discord. And if you're feeling really old school, you can even fire up a Telnet client and check out the Wearmount. Hit up the show notes for links to all of these. If you want to participate more directly in the podcast, you can send us an email, or if you're feeling a little bit braver, leave us a voice message in one of 3 places: the podcast website, our Facebook page, or on anchor.fm. And you're also welcome to join us on our Discord server to chat with us, to lurk, or even contribute to podcast recordings when they happen. And again, links in the show notes. If you'd like to support Spam Humbug, you can do so at patreon.com/ultimacodex, where for as little as $1 a month, you can get access to episodes the day before they go live to the general public. You'll also get access to behind-the-scenes audio when we have some to share, and possibly other interesting content. But we also welcome your moral support. You can like the Ultima series on Facebook, follow at Ultima Codex on Twitter, or leave the podcast a review on iTunes. And you're also welcome to share our episodes with your friends and social media circles. Spam Humbug is a production of the Ultima Codex. You can find show notes online at spamhumbug.com. Thank you for listening, and until next time, be virtuous.